33.5, Unnecessary Romanian Adventure. Hello, and welcome to this bonus episode of the History of American Food. This time, I'll be giving you my hot take on Romanian food, and especially that it is the America of Europe when it comes to food traditions. The food's delicious, by the way, sometimes familiar and sometimes things you would not expect. But the most important thing, Romania has been absorbing, adapting, and reinterpreting food from other cultures for longer than Europe had any idea there was an American out there. You get at your map, toss away the 1980s influence version of the sixth largest country in the EU, and let's dig in. The first thing you need to know is that as a kid who grew up in the waning days of the Cold War, version 1.0, Romania was one of those places I knew was off limits. Sure, maybe I could go there. Heck, I managed to worm my way onto a student exchange to the Soviet Union during the days of Perestroika and Glasnost. That's the restructuring and openness in Soviet Russians speak symbolism. Look it up along with Boris Yeltsin. Links in the show notes. But why would I want to? The place was a deep, dark, closed mystery that was far away. Something Dracula, but who cares? Little did I know that after a dramatic post-German reunification change of the European game board and several hundred dice rolls later, I would find myself with a chance to visit the southern edge of the Carpathian Mountains. So I dusted off my French to leapfrog learning enough Romanian to not be a jerk, order coffee, and read menus in a measly 4 weeks. As a result, I got to eat some entirely new foods and several that were enjoyably familiar. I also got a chance to taste a few things that were common in the 17th, 18th, and even 19th century cookbooks that I thought I would never get my hands on, or at least not without a lot of effort. But before I get to food, I feel like a little orientation is in order. Other than the pictures in my own head of men in hats with the curly sheep's wool on the outside, herding sheep in the Carpathian Mountains, and, like I said, something Dracula, my own awareness of actual Romania was pretty tenuous before I started looking into this. First of all, where is Romania exactly? It touches many countries that have been in flux over the past several decades. This part of the map of Europe is still shaking off the disruption caused by the shift from monarchies to parliamentary governments, and then a series of strange bargains made at the end of World War II in Yalta. Oh yeah, and then the end of the Soviet bloc, and then, anyway, there's like a whole course in 20th century European history. It's complicated. For our purposes, Romania is surrounded on the southwest by those states known collectively as the Balkans, ever in flux and turmoil during my lifetime. To the south, it sits right above Bulgaria. Both of these regions have been firmly divided from Romania, more or less forever, by the Danube River. To the north and northeast, it shares a border with the sandwich state of Moldova, and then also with Ukraine. The Black Sea coastline makes up a significant chunk of its eastern edge, and to the west, its border is the much smaller than it used to be Hungary. Romania is surrounded by a bunch of historically exciting, possibly overactive territories and states. Anyway, Romania has been there for a lot of comings and goings. Now, if you're not particularly familiar with the Black Sea, it is this pocket inland sea that sits north of the Mediterranean. The two are connected by an historically significant narrow channel. You can tell it's an important body of water since it figures prominently in the myths and wars of at least the last 3 millennia. You might know it as the Hellespont, the Dardanelles, or by its current name, the Çanakkale Strait. This ribbon of water, 0.75 miles or 1.2 kilometers at its narrowest, is what has historically separated Asia from Europe or Turkey from Greece, depending on your period of history. Anyway, this part of the world has been contentious and very active for about as long as people have been building cities. The Black Sea itself is a bit of a mystery to us in the US, but one way to think of it is as a great lake inside the heart of Europe. But instead of the Erie Canal allowing water access to the larger Mediterranean, you have to go through the Chincoteague Strait. And instead of cow, wheat, and timber strewn upstate New York, this passage is watched over and jealously guarded by Turkey. Whichever empire or state the Turks inhabited, they have owned both sides of the waterway since the 14th century. Ever since the Russians built their empire out to the Black Sea, possession, or at least control of this strait, has been a bright, burning desire in all of Russia's incarnations. The Black Sea, especially Crimea, is the only saltwater port in all of Russia's possessions that is ice-free year-round, or at least until global warming gets going a little bit more. Not that much further more. Anyway, Romania is in lands and waters that have been in turmoil and been points of contention for always. I mean, this area and its tribes, mainly the Dacians, or as I learned while I was there, the Dacians, are mentioned in ancient Greek writings by that Herodotus guy and everything, having been coveted, administrated, and occasionally absorbed in turn by Greece, Rome, the Ottoman Turks, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Russia for good measure. The Romanian culture, architecture, food, language, everything down to the menu has had contributions from everywhere. The entire time, everything kind of reminded me of something else I kind of knew about. It makes Romania both familiar and exciting and new at the same time. The country itself possesses beautiful mountains that are rich with minerals, especially salt and gold, forests that supply trees for lumber and all sorts of food, hillsides that are fantastic for growing wine grapes. There are plenty of plains that are rich for farming and pasturage, and then in the 20th century it turned out Romania also has impressive oil reserves. With all these goodies, it became clear why every empire that has come across the place has wanted to gobble it up. And not to sensationalize or oversimplify things too much, but the history of Romania makes the intertwining storylines of Game of Thrones look like simple child's play. And I'm even talking about the extra details in the book versions. So every time this tribe or that empire has made a grab at the place, they have brought along their food traditions. Over the centuries, Romania has absorbed them, adapted them, and made them their own. And then when Romania was cut off from the wider world under the complex and painful years under Nicolae Ceausescu, it kept adapting its food. And I personally think it made it hungry for even more variety. Like American food, Romanian food is not tied to a small place. It has not been isolated and slowly cooking away, developing a style unique to just one corner of the map. Instead, Romania has been the desired prize in 1,000 fights. And with a border that is the Danube River, it put it smack dab in the middle of the Spice and Silk Road transit from China and the Spice Islands of the far, far east. So far east, I look west at it on my maps, that went to Rome and all the way to points along the Atlantic Ocean. As a result of thousands of years of being at the center of it all, Romania has developed a rather global style of food, not to mention culture and dress and architecture and anyway, because even without everyone living around them and passing through on the silk and spice roads, the varied landscapes of Romania, rich with its own food, meant it was always going to have a wide variety of foods and styles. Romania has long been part of the European grain bowl, cultivating wheat and growing gardens stuffed with the produce that were brought to America. Eggplants, celery, carrots, parsnips, onions, garlics, leeks, beets, turnips, radishes, carrots, kohlrabi, cauliflower, and all the other brassicas you can think of, not to mention the stone fruits. There are seasonal cherries, apricots, peaches, and ever so many plums, apples, quince, grapes, chestnuts, walnuts, foraged herbs, berries, and mushrooms. Those are all native. And then all of the associated farm animals, cows and sheep, so there's plenty of dairy, not to mention horses and plenty of farmyard poultry. It also has impressive forests to hunt. And so there's various relationships with swine, both domestic barnyard piggies and those terrifying forest boars of legend. See episode 26 for my thoughts on why not to be careless around pigs. And then there were bears and deer and wild goats, and even the legendary aurochs once roamed these lands, along with many, many tasty birds of the air and the field and the waters. But then, being on the trade routes and having a significant coastline, Romania was pretty early on picking up the prizes that came back from the Americas. Potatoes and corn and tomatoes and peppers and turkeys and squashes. What I'm trying to say is Romanian food is tantalizingly familiar. There are so many ingredients I recognize, but they all have a local twist. It's either a variety that's local or there's been a particular combination of things that I had never considered. So I was only there for a week and I didn't get to eat all the food. I tried, and I can report that I need to try more. Yeah, with that, it's time to talk about the food I got to try. Romanians love their polenta and their pork. And since I'm soaked in the American food past, which is also awash in salt pork and corn mush, this had my antenna all a-quiver. What's up here? Well, piggies were imports to the Americas. They have been wandering the Romanian countryside in one form or another for ages. The Saxons, who contributed much to the German and English culture, loved their pork roast. Smoked pork, salt pork, sausage, much pigginess hails from this area. So they have preparations that are familiar, but other ways that are not. They never made it over to the Americas, or, what is much more common, they arrived in the Americas, but they have fallen out of fashion. I tried naked sausages, which recall American sausage patties. The garlic and red pepper was familiar, but the expected sage was missing and replaced with local flavors. The polenta, also familiar, but different than the Italian-style polenta we in America are used to. Romanian polenta is softer. Now, I never saw it made, so I'm not sure if it's ground finer or cooked with more liquid or what, but the texture is closer to smooth, fluffy mashed potatoes. Savory, warm, and perfect with all manner of things, including being fried into a cake that can be taken out into the fields as a peasant's midday meal. The way this tracks with American hoe cake had my full attention. I confess, I had expected more wheat, and it was there. But when the starchy corn arrived all over the north shores of the Mediterranean in the 16th century, it was taken up enthusiastically in several places, not just Italy. But where the wheat is, it gets made into a variety of breads, pastries, flatbreads, crepes, and tasty nibbly biscuits. And the arrival of potatoes also spurred the development of very fine, fluffy, yet hearty potato breads. Now, one of the simpler but delicious bites that will sound weird to us Americans was a whipped pork lard spread on potato bread, topped with the favored purple onion and sprinkled liberally with Hungarian-style paprika. Now, American paprika gets a bad rap for being boring and tasting basically like red dust. I suspect that often the problem is that people are working with very old paprika that has lost all of its power, but even when it's new, the pepper pod being used to make it is nothing special. It turns out just which capsicum fruit, which pepper pod the paprika comes from, can make a huge difference. And the American grocery store stuff leans towards sweet, and that's kind of it. And we also generally don't use enough to make it worthwhile. So when you're using just a little paprika and it's expired that came from an indifferent source to begin with, I tend to agree with the people who wonder what the point of paprika is. On the other hand, smoked paprika has made a splash in the last few years, and it does do more. The good stuff might convert you. And then the varieties of Spanish and Hungarian paprika out there, from peppers bred for the job. And whether smoked or not, they each bring different combinations of sweetness, gentle heat, and some bitterness that pairs well with fatty, vegetable, and acidic flavors. So these liberally paprika-dusted slabs of larded onion bread had me ready for the next thing, which was something else that was new to me. And it stopped me in my tracks. It was sour soup, also known as chorba. It's soup as we know it. There's flavorful broth, some vegetables, some meat, some herbs, but then it's finished with a flourish. Most of these soups are enriched with some combination of cream or sour cream or egg yolk. And so it becomes this creamy, rich soup. And then at the very end, it gets a final splash of borscht. Now I said borscht, not borscht. I was confused by the word at first. B-O-R-S with the little thingy off the bottom to give that sh sound, not borscht. Because, I was also thinking of the beety cabbage soup, and it turns out this comes from the fact that quite often the sour liquid they use is the liquid that comes off of fermented cabbage. As I was driving around the countryside, I saw literal box trucks packed full of cabbage that people were selling by the roadside so everybody could make their, effectively, sauerkraut. So Romanian borscht is a fermented sour liquid. It's like vinegar, but it has more depth. If you're not fermenting cabbage for sauerkraut equivalent, it can also be made from lightly fermented ground grain, often a combination of wheat and corn grits. And this sour-sweet complex liquid is splashed in at the end to balance the richness and cream and the meats and the other ingredients in these soups. And they're tasty and comforting and delicious. And every region seems to have their own, and then to make it more complicated, they shift with the seasons. There are chorba that depend on spring herbs, there are lamb ones, there's a pretty famous meatball one, and the list goes on. The version I got to taste was the chorba ardelenjeska, hailing from the Transylvanian region. The more I look at the map, I think of Transylvania as the heart of the country because it lies within this protective C shape of the Carpathian Mountains. The defining ingredients of this particular sour soup are smoked pork, potatoes, and tarragon. The version I had on my slightly bleary first full day entirely focused and captivated my attention. It was this early dish that put me on notice. This food is all familiar. You've seen almost all the ingredients before, but they're going to catch you off guard in good ways. Romania has delicious cheese and dairy traditions. You can see the Greek and Turkish influence in the cheese that is acid-curded and doesn't melt. It makes you think of feta. But it's generally less salty and much creamier. There's a variety that makes me think of cottage cheese, where it's the dry cheese with sour cream stirred in. So it's like cottage cheese, but drier, or it might make you think of like yogurt cheese. Regardless, it was very comforting as a breakfast. But as you go north in Romania, there are also harder, slightly aged cheeses, closer to what Americans think of as sort of proper cheese. They tend to be cream and ivory colored, and they melt in the heat. Oh, and they also go very well with the local honey, the grapes, and the walnuts. Romania, with all its farming, its fruit trees, and its grapes, so many yards had fruit trees and grape arbors, both in the city and beyond. Anyway, the country generally prefers honey to sugar. Beehives and small piles of 2 or 10 dot the countryside. While America was partly founded in a mission to expand the sugar trade, Romania is literally in that cradle the drier Mediterranean turns towards and calls their cradle of milk and honey. The walnuts in Romania are a different variety from the black or English walnuts that are commercially grown and most widely available in the U.S. Instead, they are a sweeter, less tannic variety. The U.S. has always had a white walnut that was generally known as the butternut, by the way, the origin of the squash's name. Before quite so many local agricultural varieties had been pushed aside in the name of efficiency, butternuts were the favored nut for decorating ice cream sundaes. Anyway, I ended up getting some of the Romanian walnuts at a produce market, and their sweeter flavor pinged a bell in my head, so I nibbled them along with the local grapes with a special glee. Now, as a person in the US who has only had seedless grapes for several decades, I had to take a second to remember how to deal with the seeds in them. Can I eat them? Yes, it's fine to eat grape seeds. Or how do I spit them out and not like super gross? You can do that too. It takes a little practice. But after a few days, I got the hang of it. And yes, these grapes had more flavor than just the very, very sweet or tart Thompson and hybrid grapes that are coming up in the US. Let me tell you, they are definitely worth the seeds. And you can swallow them, you can chomp them. It's fine. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it's not just table grapes in Romania. Grapes and wine have been long a part of the Romanian economy. The name Romania, as you might guess, owes something to those past days when the Roman Empire had used the area as a supply depot for those items essential for mounting military campaigns: wheat and barley, hams, wine, and cheese. Once Rome had subdued, or at least come to a détente with the Carpathian tribes and secured this important link in their supply lines, they started poking at the people living across the Hellespont. You know, the Turks, the Persians, all those people with great mountains and dry plains to their back. And as far as the Romans were concerned, possibly the secret of that silk. I guess what I'm saying is "an army travels on its stomach" quote made me very thoughtful when taking in how good Romania is at growing food. No wonder Rome made such a mark. Anyway, back to the grapes. Romania has experienced ups and downs in their wine industry. The country of Georgia, just over the Black Sea, has been making wine since at least 6000 BCE, and it spread widely over the next 2 millennia. The Thracians, the Dacians, the Getae, and other tribes that would contribute heavily to Saxon culture were definitely making wine by at least 4000 BCE. Back in the days of the powerful Greeks around the 1st century BCE, there was this king, Burebista, who united the tribes in what is now Romania into a force large enough to be remarked upon by that Greek historian Herodotus. Burebista, upon the advice of one of his priests, demanded that all the grapevines be burned. In the cursory study I've put into this for an episode about modern food, the consensus seems to be no one's really sure why anymore, but maybe something destroy resources or something too much drunkenness. Anyway, grapes survived, the wine trade returned, and quite a bit of it was lubricating the Roman Republic and then the Empire. Romania's wine, like the rest of its foods, has been buffeted and influenced and enjoyed by the hungry imperialist states Romania has been surrounded by. Romania hit another low point while it was effectively isolated from the world between the 1960s through 1989. And wine production was then all about quantity. However, the long relationship with wine could not be broken. Even as new commercial vineyards are beginning to reappear on the hillsides, plenty of people continue to grow grape bowers in their yards, contributing to the family barrel each year. Because I was only there for a week, my chances to sample the local stuff was limited. But I will say it's worth a return trip. In an oversimplified way, Romanian wine tastes like it is at the crossroads of dry Italian reds and the fruity German whites. They grow plenty of the big-name, recognizable varieties, but the local Fetiesca grape makes wine I would like to know more about. There are other Romanian local grapes starting to return to the scene that would also be worth exploring. Again, like America, they have their own grapes, but most people seem to want to use the land that is good at growing grapes to grow the ones that they brought. But over time, the local grapes will make themselves known. As a country that is used to borrowing food, adapting food, and having food thrust upon them, one result is that modern Romanian chefs are creating modern dishes with the delicious produce of the country, touched by its many influences in authentically local ways. I was lucky enough to get lunch along with a wine tasting at Casa Timiș on my way back from visiting the positively monumental Slonic salt mine. Walking into that was a bit like walking into the matte painting of the mines of Moria. But back at Casa Timiș, the chef there, Nico Lantras, is part of the movement to highlight Romanian cuisine in the modern mode. I chose the smoked duck tartare with hazelnuts, pickled baby turnips, hard-boiled quail eggs, herbs, and look, it was one of those dishes that thoroughly knocked my socks off. The textures, the flavors, that little hit of heat, a smoked tartare, that should happen more. Then, once again, there was a chorba or sour soup with lettuces and herbs and chili oils, and it was dreamy. It came with smoked lard that had crispy fried edges. Okay, I know for some people that might be a bridge too far, but for me it was a beautiful melding of flavors that recalled many things and yet was entirely a dish of its own. Like so much of Romanian food, it reminded me of things while still being its own thing. Like my first chorba, I was completely captivated. There was something very special about all of these very recognizable ingredients being combined so harmoniously in new ways. Not in something that was like experimental or challenging, instead something someone else had been developing. And now here it was presented in a beautiful execution in ways I had simply never pondered. And then I also got to tuck into another selection of cheeses, and it came with a fabulous surprise. A jam of green walnuts. That is, green or immature walnuts picked in the spring, blanched, and then preserved in a heavy sugar syrup. This is a recipe I've read over and over in multiple 18th and early 19th century cookbooks. The instruction, quote, soft enough to put a knitting needle through, unquote, was the most memorable instruction. And as I was eating it, I could understand what it meant. And here was this dish sitting on my plate. The waiter and my tour guide thought I was a little nuts. No pun intended, but once they understood my excitement, they thought it was sweet, but yeah, I have enthusiasms that are off the beaten path. But getting to experience this direct tie between then and now, here and there, it was a magical moment. And for those of you with access to a walnut tree that you never bother with because the nuts get all wormy, the green walnut jam made with nuts picked from the tree, not off the ground, that could be worth the trouble. Talk to me. Now, after all that savory, it's time to delve into desserts and sweets. And once again, Romania has the familiar and the new to offer. As part of the wheat basket with its high appreciation of French architecture, politics, decorative and culinary arts, patisserie and pastry, these are all alive and enviable in Bucharest. For my first breakfast, I snagged a yeasted coffee cake type pastry with slices of peach baked into it. Plum, apple, and cherry are also really popular in baking. As I was there in the fall, I missed the multiple varieties of cherries. The absolute dominance of the beng cherry in the US makes me a little bit sad, but apples were everywhere. Since Romania isn't that far from the apple homeland across the Caucasus Mountains, the varieties were impressive. And not a red delicious in sight. Fabulous. Eclairs also happened to be popular, and I gleefully sampled a few of the dainty delights. Pistachio and salted brown butter for me, as well as a nibble of the classic chocolate. And all of these went well with Romania's excellent strong coffee. Caught in the middle, Romania does both tea and coffee well. It was literally walked over as the Turks went to the fateful battle with Vienna that led to the firm adoption of coffee in Europe. Romania has been exposed to and appreciating coffee since at least the 17th century, and since they've been exchanging recipes with the Turks since at least the 14th century, likely even earlier. Oh yeah, and since they got their tea over land, yeah, it's chaya over there. They love it black and green, sweetened and not. I mean, honestly, there's a style of tea for everyone, even the milky spiced Indian style chai. Anyway, tea and coffee, chai shikafya. Not pretentious, but always good, however you like it. and even more sweets. Again, familiar, but not the same, were all over. Another highlight was the plum dumpling. This was a sweet sour plum wrapped in dough and boiled, and then crusted all over with cinnamon sugar. Americans once adored their apple dumplings, and they shifted to the apple fritter. And now it's mostly just donuts, donut holes, and cake pops. But for me, one crispy, crusted, fluffy, spiced plum dumpling in, I feel that the abandonment of properly cooked dumplings was an error. I also got to sample a very different take on pumpkin pie. It's still the stewed pumpkin or other orange squash cooked down to a smooth puree. But the spices are less of a melange, rather leaning on vanilla and cinnamon. If I'm certain of one thing, Romanians favor cinnamon. Anyway, this simpler combination brings out the pumpkin flavor rather than smashing it so flat that the spice mix can exist entirely without the pumpkin. It's much more pumpkin than spice. And on the less serious and far more whimsical side, there is this childhood sweet salame de biscuit, or cookie salami. It's made with broken pieces of sweet biscuits, that is, cookies to us Americans. During the period of isolation, true chocolate bars were extremely rare in Romania, but cocoa powder could still be found. To make this particular treat, milk and sugar are boiled together briefly, and then butter's melted into that. Just enough rum essence is added to give it that mysterious flavor. Then unsweetened cocoa is stirred in to make a sticky dough. Broken cookie bits are folded in, and the whole thing is rolled together into a sausage or salami shape and chilled. Now, once solid, this dough mixture is sliced and has the appearance of sort of a mad salami. It's certainly a tea cookie that would make an impression. And in a fun way, it's a sweet that expresses so much of Romania's personality. A conglomeration that all comes together to make something new out of familiar pieces. I also had fish from the Black Sea, wild mushrooms, and a delicious sweet and savory zakuska. For my time learning Russian, to me, the word meant more or less cold snack or antipasti. It sort of worked as a bar snack with vodka. But in Romanian, zakuska specifically refers to a blended roasted vegetable spread. Sweet red pepper, eggplant, onion, and tomato blended together and spread on all manner of bread and whatnot. It's almost like a blended pepperonata. Romanians in general appreciate plenty of herbs and spiciness in their food, so it didn't surprise me to spy a large number of Mexican restaurants around the city of Bucharest. Not Spanish food, but specifically Mexican. With Romania's wide use of corn, potatoes, and chili peppers in various elements of their food, it seemed like a natural match. And my other taster on this trip reported back, tacos in Romania are very good, especially the ones filled with local beef or Black Sea fish. In fact, as I was dizzied by the variety of foods and food influences in foreign restaurants, Bucharest is a medium-big city, much like other medium-big cities. The Thai, the Mexican, the kebab, and the shawarma shops, delis with excellent local meats, and Cubano sandwiches on the menu. The produce markets and the grocery stores, they look so familiar and yet have plenty of things that make you think twice. There's so much, that's almost like, And then there's the fact that, like America, Romania has embraced more than one starch. Often when looking at national cuisines, there's usually one starch, highlighted overall. Wheat bread, rice, pasta, tortillas, fufu, yams. But in Romania, like in the US, there's a starch for every different occasion. Some things go with bread, others go with polenta, others with rice, and they have yeast-raised breads and flatbreads. They have it all. And they seem ready and willing to try something else new. With all my years of French and passive exposure to Spanish, I couldn't understand a lot of Romanian except when people were very kind and spoke very slowly. Yet I could read a surprising amount after just a few weeks on Duolingo. I could order food even if I was in a restaurant where nobody spoke much English. By the way, this was not the norm. English was very present. See, the grammar they use in Romanian is the same system exported by all those imperialistic Romans as they headed out west. So all the same Latin roots are strewn all over the language. And because I took a few years of Russian, the consistently phonetic Romanian language turned out to be this puzzle I could almost figure out. And Romanian food was much the same. So many of the pieces were so familiar, but they weren't the same. And then they went together in ways I wasn't expecting. But the result was delicious, and in the end, it all made sense. And then the topper was seeing that so many of the ingredients familiar and important to American food were actually from the region that contains Romania. Most of the stuff imported into America in its early years was local stuff in Romania. But then there were all the expected age of exploration imports from the Americas, the tomatoes, the corn, the chilies, the sunflowers. Sunflower oil is the oil of Romania. Sunflower seeds are the peanuts of Romania. While it's true, the brassica plant that makes canola oil is making inroads because the summers are getting drier and hotter and longer due to global warming. For now, sunflower oil is queen. To someone like me with a recently vague understanding of Romania's global weather position, it might seem like Romania should be an olive oil country, but it turns out it's a little too north, a little too wet, and a little too cool to grow much of that. In fact, for a long time, like America, it was largely an animal fat country, butter and lard and beef fat and sheep fat and suet. But like America, they've embraced the addition of plant oils. But instead of America's wholesale adoration of corn and cottonseed oil, they took up the sunflower. Talking to my tour guides, it was fun to understand that it's been there so long. Just like in Ukraine, most people don't even know it was an American import along with corn. It's fun to be a food historian. For me at least. I think they enjoyed that. And so the global exchange goes on. Few places are as good at working with a wide and shifting variety as Romania. If I haven't convinced you that Romania is the America of Europe when it comes to foodways, then by all means reach out and let's talk about it. But if you're intrigued and would like to know more, well, I want to thank my tour guides on this unnecessary but eye-opening adventure to Bucharest and surrounds, so you might also dive into a food and history adventure with them. Thanks to Laura with the fabulous local tour company Step by Step Bucharest. Should you be so lucky to join them, be sure to eat a light breakfast and be ready to walk around. There is so much to taste and see. And if you want to go deeper into the country and get to know more parts, especially the interior of Romania, Christy and Exodus Travels can show you more of what a beautifully old and yet complicated place Romania is. There are so many castles and none of them look the same. And then there's also the question of what is the number of ways you can build a cottage that perseveres? And also, what's for dinner? Anyway, links for these two tours are also in the show notes. And if travel isn't in the cards, please look up Irina Georgescu's books Carpathia, Tava, and Danube. These three can take you on culinary adventures right in your kitchen. And the great thing about Romanian food is that you likely have access to everything you need from your garden, local farmers markets, and your local grocery, except for the borscht. Go for a little fermentation adventure with the borscht. All in all, Romania is a fascinating place with a storied history. It's been present for so much of history and making plenty of its own. But the second half of the 20th century left it with a hole in its heart. It's a little shaggy right now, but it's full of beauty, and it's busily picking up the pieces and building its place in the modern world. As a country, Romania is in a hurry with big plans, and I heartily endorse looking into what it's all about. Thanks for listening. Any email questions or quibbles will reach me at thehistoryofamericanfood@gmail.com. Music for this podcast is Fingerlympics by Dr. Turtle. And you can see my pictures of Romania and its food on my accounts on Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram. And in all those places, I am at THOA Food. And I will often exchange nonsense and wax historical about American food on those accounts as well. Thanks for listening extra.